Welcome to Beyond the Office, Building and Leading Remote Teams. I'm your host, Bill Keller. And on today's episode, we're excited to have David Keller. He is a longtime expert in the newspaper business, literally growing up in the business with his father. And he's been in this business for over 3 decades and has an incredible experience basically taking newspapers, which are traditional medium, and taking them into the new digital age, and not only helping them survive, but helping them to thrive. And we're excited to have him on the show today because he has digital teams that he works with, and we're excited to hear about his experience working with remote teams around the world to keep his newspapers going on a daily basis. So David, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey Bill, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? I know that you, for almost 3 decades, you were working with the Herald there in Ohio, but now have moved on to the Budget, which is, I don't think most people probably even know about the Budget, but could you tell us a little bit about that? And I believe it's the oldest and largest newspaper for Plain and Amish community.
Yeah, it's really what I like to call a unicorn in the newspaper business. I come from a traditional newspaper background where, I ran a county seat community newspaper, which has a little bit of similarity to what we're doing here at the Budget, but just on a very small level. The Budget is very unique. You could almost view it as the Amish Facebook, if you will, or the Amish social media. It's how we may go outside and take a snap of the skies and say, hey, it's looking whatever outside today. But these guys sit down with pen and paper and they write it out. And we have over 1,000 scribes who contribute to the paper. And this is how they get their information to one another. And the letters start out usually, hey, it's a bright and sunny day today, or it's cold and windy up on the hill. And Jebediah went out and took care of the cows, and this is the kind of stuff that these guys like to read. So it's really unique. Most newspapers today have gotten a lot thinner, because of the recent challenges that they have with retaining advertising and the surge of production costs, frankly. And the Budget is going strong. We average 64 pages every week, and sometimes we go up to 72 pages. It's a very thick newspaper, and we reach out to nearly 50,000 readers each week, which is great for advertisers. So it's a newspaper that is thriving in this digital age with an audience who is very non-digital.
I find really fascinating is because you have this community. If you were to read this newspaper, you might think you stepped back in time like 100 years, maybe even more. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But the thing that's unique is the owners of the paper have decided and, said, how do we still remain relevant, as far as keeping our production costs in line and finding the people that we need. And so they've hired remote teams to utilize help around the world to help them to produce this newspaper. And it's fascinating to me that they would take that leap. And it's actually, really a testament to their innovation and to moving forward, even though they have a very traditional medium.
And that is a very good point. The leadership here is very forward thinking, and we're always looking at ways to expand the business and really run a modern day business to produce a very traditional, old-fashioned product. And that's why it's so fun to work here. And I can't exactly speak to that decision-making process because that was put into place before I arrived. But it's very, I want to say, almost necessary today to have this relationship. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without our overseas team. Point blank. They produce all of our marketing materials, all of our, they set our ads for us. They do our graphic design for our advertising, and which is typically what a newspaper would focus on. But the Budget is unique in that it's not only a newspaper, it's honestly an entertainment company for the Amish. So there are many other facets to the business besides just putting out a newspaper. And the remote team is a big integral part of that. They produce all of our anything graphics related. So not just the advertisements in the paper, but We go to trade shows and expos and things where we set up booths to represent the paper among the Amish community. And they produce all the graphics for all the signage and even the table coverings and all of that kind of stuff. The business cards, the pamphlets, like I said, all the marketing materials. And it's such a good turnaround of that stuff. And honestly, if we were trying to do all that stuff in-house, we would never have the time to do it because we have to go through the day-to-day process of preparing the paper from receiving the letters in the mail to getting them typed up and processed and formatted and getting the paper, put together and all of that stuff. So they're very integral to what we do here.
Well, that's awesome. So I'm just curious, like with all the challenges in the newspaper business, I know from being an employer for 30 years, what are some of the challenges you're facing with, your domestic workforce, and how are you addressing them? Because I want to understand, where you're coming from. Like, what are you dealing with on an everyday basis? Because I think that would help some people to understand, or at least recognize, like, hey, I have some of those same challenges, and didn't know if you're seeing something, whether it's a lack of certain skills, or hey, the people that have these skills are kind of aging out over a period of time, or what are you seeing?
Actually, it's all of the above, Bill. Now, if I can take a step back in time just a little bit, back to my days at the Herald, we come from a small town. It is the county seat of the county, but it's still a small town. And when we were doing all of this work in-house, as the process became more and more complex to produce an advertisement, back if you look at old newspapers from the 60s and 70s, you just see, boxes with some type in it and maybe a picture or two, nothing really fancy at all. And just about anybody could put those together. But as we have become more advanced in our graphic design efforts, and we're producing, nicer looking ads, the people with those particular skill sets, now you're getting into a funnel here where you're funneling down and you don't have as big of a workforce to pull from, especially in a small town. So, and then you've got this constant turnover of, people that they come in, they learn their skill, they hone their skill, and then they usually leave to go pursue, higher income or, a different situation of some kind. And so then you're kind of starting over and you've got this churn. So, and I'll come back to that point here in a second, but fast forwarding back to the budget here, I haven't really had a lot of experience with those issues here because in the couple of years that I've been here, we've been able to retain our staff. So we haven't really had the turnover that usually we in our business have to deal with on a regular basis, which is a good thing. It's that helps keeps costs down, and your team just gets better and better and better at working together, and you get more oil in that machine, if you will. But I'm looking back at a situation. I said where we'll go back to that. In my later years as publisher, talking with some of my colleagues, we recognized these challenges when it comes to graphics work. And I remember a couple conversations that we've had together among those of us who put out papers in the state of Ohio. Hey, maybe we should get together and form a consortium and pool our resources and use one another's graphic staffs to help produce for each other. If nothing else, to help cover vacations, to help with surges in workload, when we have busier times of the year or whatnot. And so we were already thinking about the idea of remote staffing, even back then, but more on a semi-local level. But those talks just we could never bring it to fruition. We could never make that happen on our own because we're so busy putting out our product. And so that's where a business like Staffing Global, like what you guys are doing, really comes into play, because I don't know how you guys get all the hours in the day to do stuff, but we push out this workload that we get put in our laps, and we push it out to your team, and they produce everything, they bring it back, and we couldn't do it without them.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm curious a little bit, what have you noticed, what are some of the differences working with the domestic team? And it's great that you've been able to retain them. It's one of the, I guess, another reason that you're kind of the unicorn in the industry. You've been around for, the budget's been around for how long now? Is it 100 and some years or more, I think.
Definitely over 100 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Herald you were with was, I think you said 175 years. That's incredible. You know, when businesses come and go, sometimes in the span of months here, you know, in this day and age, to have something that spans back that kind of history. But I'm just curious, like, what are some of the differences you're seeing? They could be good, bad, indifferent. I don't know. But there's probably some differences in working with that. And I know you have more direct interaction with your local team. But what have you found so that people would say is, hey, I'm a little concerned about this. How would I see? How would this be different? What do you notice?
Well, I think your experience would vary based on what your needs are. And we're a newspaper, so we have a regular deadline that we have to follow. Deadline. So everything that we do in the course of a week has to be done quickly. There's got to be a quick turnaround. So in that respect, the communication is paramount. Okay, to be able to communicate what we need so that the work is done accurately the first time around, so that we don't have a lot of back and forth and spend a lot of time on things. When you have a local team, yeah, it's easier. It's easier to just walk into an office or walk up to a desk and you can put something in front of somebody and say, hey, I need you to move this here and do this, or what do you think about this? Would this be better? So there is a level of collaboration that is easier to do in the office. That's for sure, no doubt. But we don't do the graphics work here, but you've got to have a really good handle on what you're wanting to produce so that you can effectively communicate that to the team. And so, the skill sets that we need to have is how to accurately request the work that we need to have produced, how to accurately describe what needs to happen. So you've got to be a little bit of a wordsmith and be able to type really well. And that may springboard us into a conversation about other challenges. Yeah.
I love to hear those, and I think that's what you mentioned there is, it's easier to have a domestic team in many ways, because like you said, you just go into the office, but I think it requires having a remote team more intentionality. That's a word that I use quite a bit. And I think that's what I was hearing you say. And also regarding, just making sure that your expectations are clear. That's what you're talking about. And that is so critically important, because I think a lot of times people assume a lot of things along the way, and we know what happens when you assume, right? And so I see this all the time, and this is how you're able to do this effectively, by making sure that they know what their expectations are, and it's clear communication. Clarity is kindness. And making sure that, you're being intentional in that. And so I mentioned, it's when we talk about remote staff, this is not the absence of problems, right? If you have employees, you have people, no matter if they're working domestically or they're working remotely, you're going to have some challenges. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. What have you experienced? We don't try to shy away from that, when we're talking, even though it might be my team, is like, this is going to happen. And then how do we go about addressing that? So I'd love to hear with that, because I think people really, that's a fear that a lot of people have. What are the challenges you're going to have? And then how are we going to overcome them?
Like I said, it could depend a little bit on what your needs are. If you're in a particular business where you don't have the deadline looming over you. I mean, in any business, time is money. So you want to be able to do what you do quickly and effectively and profitably. But, the challenge that we have is, like I said, we need kind of quick turnaround on things, which is why the communication is so important. When I first arrived, we were already working with a remote team, but there was and there were a few of us who arrived at about the same time. So we have like this little group of people here who are new, and we're trying to kind of continue the process that was laid out before us. And we realized that a lot of mistakes were being made, and the question was raised, why? Why are we getting all of these errors? We kind of figured out that the process really wasn't very streamlined, and I don't think that there was really good communication. And these days, now we don't do any phone calls. Sometimes I'm a phone guy. I'm sitting next to my phone here. I like to just pick up the phone, say, hey, Jack, we have this problem, let's get it fixed. But we can't do that here. So because you're talking about a difference in culture with people overseas, a little bit of a communication gap there. So a lot of typing is the way we communicate back and forth. So, the challenge was, okay, how do we fix this so that our expectations are more clear? So the first thing we did is and I think this was the first time that this was done, it almost sounds like, you might be able to speak to this more than I, but, we set up a Zoom meeting and met the team, and so we had face-to-face, we knew who we were talking with. So we set up a meeting to discuss, here's these issues, this is what's happening, how can we streamline this to make it easier for you? So it took an extra level of communication there in the beginning, and we hammered out some details on a new workflow that would make things easier for us, easier for them. We're able to, there's places where we can really go into detail about what we want. And that has been over the past year and a half since we started that, maybe a little more than a year and a half. That has dramatically increased the speed of the workflow back and forth. And anytime we would start to see some issues crop up, we would explain that by email. Hey, we've got some of these issues. And then if it didn't get resolved, then we would set up another Zoom meeting. We would talk, because we don't talk on the phone, regularly. So we would set up a meeting and talk about those things and clear it up, and then it would be fixed. So any challenge can be overcome. Any problem that you have, with just a little bit of time to take to fix it and to communicate your expectations, it's oil on the gears, then the machine runs smoother.
So I'm curious, like working with your domestic staff and your remote teams, what has been your experience, or what has been their experience? So what kind of feedback have you gotten, good, bad, or indifferent? Sometimes people, really it's like, oh, why are we doing this? And, I don't understand. Why don't we just hire more people here? Were you getting any more of that pushback? Do you find, is there any challenges, integrating them with the domestic staff to make sure that everybody was happy? Because this really, from my understanding, is you didn't take our staff and replace anybody. Basically, you're needing more staff. You couldn't find them. But so.
Yeah, no, it's, most of us, at least the ones who interact on a daily basis, we're pretty well on board, with what we're doing. Yeah. And it's part of our job on a day to day, and there may be some who don't quite maybe understand the process, or sometimes say, oh, why do you have to send that back, so many times, or why do you, so yeah, those things those people do kind of pipe up sometimes, but it's really not an issue. And in our particular, we're a pretty small group here, so it's really not that much of an issue.
And that's another thing that people were worried about. And so that's one of the reasons that I bring it up, is because, like, how are my local team going to accept it? And so it's just one thing that people are going to need to at least consider if they're considering going down this road. And so I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, it's, obviously, at least in our experience, I mean, the whole process is beneficial to everyone on the staff, even if it's not someone who deals in this department, but, we're able to get a workload, produced that no one else has time to do. If you want to continue to be paid a salary or, you want to continue to have an increase in your salary or whatever, you've got to be profitable. And,
is that important?
And
in this business,
it is to me. I don't know if it is to everybody else, but
that's, you're losing $1 in every paper, but you're making it up in volume. That doesn't work for too long, right?
There you go. Yeah. But so, and frankly, from an employer's point of view, it is less expensive to have an arrangement like this, where you outsource some of that workload that is possible to be outsourced. It's just cheaper. Mm-hmm. You're not paying all the taxes and all the expenses that come with having an employee on the payroll, and that's the bottom line. The bottom line is the bottom line.
And I appreciate you saying that. It should be beneficial to all parties. That's really the goal here. I think it's, we work to the benefit of all, to the exclusion of none. That's really our goal, is to come in here and go, like, how do we support you? How do we support your team? How can we help you to get things done? And that's really the goal of remote teams. I think the people that have done this well, and, in the beginning, there's going to be some challenges, like you said, and you were able to overcome them through, changing the workflow, communicating in a different way. And that's really what I think people need to understand. Once they understand that, one, it's not going to be a detriment to other people, right? And actually, can help our profitability, can help us, give other people within our organization other opportunities to grow that they couldn't have, because they were oftentimes, stuck doing the production level work that, the outsource team now does. And so they can move into higher level tasks and higher level, operations. And that's really helpful for them as well, because they can provide more value and bring more value to you as a paper or to your team. So.
Yep, I couldn't have said it better myself.
So are there any misconceptions or biases, something that like, hey, when I first came, started working with them, I thought this, and then over a period of time, my thoughts have changed?
For me personally, no, that was never the case. Like I said, we've tried to do this kind of thing in the past, and we dipped our toe in the water and we experimented a little bit with it, and just could never really get anything to work. So I already knew what we were doing here, and I understood the importance in doing it. I can't think of any bias whatsoever at least on my level. I haven't heard any of that or detected any of that from any of the other staff.
And sometimes it's not necessarily even a negative bias. It's just like, oh, I thought this and I found out that.
I can understand, where some people just may even have an issue with outsourcing in general. Sometimes you talk about outsourcing, everybody gets very tense and we want to be able to support an American workforce, and that kind of thing. And why would we farm it out to those guys? And I'm a big fan and a big proponent of made in America products, standing by your own economy and what you produce here. But I have no issue with a healthy partnership. We're not running sweatshops here. That's not the point. It's literally a partnership to help expand your business. And frankly, it just supports the global economy, when it really comes down to it. So no problem with those partnerships at all. In fact, we view, it's not just a partnership. We view our remote team as really an integral part of our team. We'd invite them to our Christmas party if we could, we know them by name, we know their faces, we know their voices, and they're part of the budget.
And that's really when it works best, in our opinion, is when they're not just, oh, we send it to that team over there. And, when they're really an integral part of your team, like you've done, that's when it really, gels and works well. So that's awesome. So I'm curious, as you look towards the future with the newspaper industry, obviously there's a lot of challenges, and you're kind of in a very maybe unique place in the newspaper industry dealing with the Amish community. But what do you see for the future, whether it's, just for technology in the newspaper industry or for different teams? How do you see it changing? What do you see that's going to have to happen to remain relevant in the coming years?
Well, Bill, the big, I guess, elephant in the room, so to speak, in our industry is, will the day come, or when will the day come when we cease to print physically on paper? That's really the next big hurdle that we're all anticipating is, how can we generate an income producing an all digital product? Because more and more and more, we've still got some baby boomers left on the earth. We still have people who like to have that physical product in their hands, a pen and paper guy, myself. I just don't know if we can do that, because what we've experienced up to this point is the toes that we've dipped in the digital waters has revealed to us that we can produce print dollars, but only digital dimes. There's just not a big enough way to generate, or there's not a good market for an all digital product. Some people can do it. There have been some who have broken that barrier and have all news websites that they've been able to monetize and create an income from, but probably a small one, and maybe it would support a very small couple people, not something that could produce a income for a large workforce. So that's really what I see as the changes that will be coming up. Who knows what's going to happen? We get new technology every year. And, back in the 90s, who would have known that we would have had computers, to produce everything instead of, cutting out lines of type with an X-Acto knife and paste and rolling it onto a piece of paper and, taking a picture of it and developing it and burning a plate and putting on a press. We didn't know. Maybe they'll come up with digital paper that changes content every day or, each week, and you still have a newspaper to hold and read, who knows? I mean, it's really kind of hard to tell. That sounds outlandish, but really, truly, you don't know what can happen. But that's really the biggest change that I can see industry wide that could be coming around the bend somewhere along the line is where, as an industry, do we stop printing on paper? And because that's a lot of our costs. I mean, payroll is always your biggest cost. In our business, the second biggest cost is your newsprint and your postage and all the process that you have to do to produce that physical product and get it to market.
Yeah, there's challenges ahead for sure, but I'm sure you'll be able to navigate them. Question for you. This goes to what you're talking about print. Have you ever had to say, stop the presses? I'm just curious, have you always seen that, growing up, and you see the newspaper editor comes out, stop the
I have actually
You
said,
have actually
yes.
said that.
I have actually said yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes, notice some big errors, and this is back in the day when I used to actually, we always outsourced. When I got involved, being an old newspaper, we had a press in the building and we printed everything, there. When I started back in the early 90s, we had already outsourced our printing. So there's kind of the first step that newspapers have taken to begin outsourcing work is we started outsourcing printing because running a press is very expensive. So I would go and in my younger years and take the pages of the newspaper to the press and they'd load everything up and start printing, and I'd stand there at the press and we'd inspect the paper and things. And I've noticed stuff and I've had to say, hey, stop the press. And it has happened.
Well, that's great. So as we kind of wrap up here, what advice would you give to another organization that would be looking to use digital teams, remote teams? What advice would you have for them to move forward in a good way?
Well, I would definitely keep my mind open to it. It's definitely something that it's basically a turnkey solution for employees or for staff. And you can treat it as a fixed cost on your sheet there. And I think the pros far outweigh the cons, to be honest with you, especially if you're a small business and you just don't have, you can't find the staff that will stay. A lot of times you just find, people come and they want something bigger, and they won't stay with you if you're a small organization. And of course, bigger organizations are always looking for ways to cut costs and keep the bottom line going. And it's just a good way to do that, I believe. I'd give it a try. Any challenges that may come up, just like any business challenge, you can overcome that. Put a little bit of time into it, a little bit of thought, come up with a solution, and keep those cogs greased on the machine, and it'll run. I'm a big fan.
Well, I appreciate that. That's great advice. So where can people find more about you and the budget? Where could they go?
Of course, contact the budget. We always have tours and people coming in, checking out the operation all the time. It's fun for people to see. But you just Google the budget. Just Google the budget or maybe Amish newspaper. And we have just articles everywhere. And on YouTube, there's some video. If you search the budget on YouTube, you can find out some information about us. We don't have a website now. We did for a little while, but it just wasn't part of who we are.
Well, if you got a community that's into newspapers, the website's not going to probably be their thing. So
we stopped that. But we do have a large footprint on the web, just from the years and years of press coverage. Just search for us.
Well, thank you so much, David. Appreciate you being on today. We appreciate your advice and all your wisdom there. And so from Beyond the Office, thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.